What the Tech is brought to you by Storyblocks. Storyblocks Video gives you studio quality 4K stock video without blowing your budget. 2 words, unlimited downloads. To find out more, go to storyblocks.com/whatthetech. Rocket Loans, part of the Quicken Loans family of companies, offers personal loans from $2,000 to $35,000 by visiting rocketloans.com/whatthetech. That's rocketloans.com/whatthetech. Hey everybody, welcome to What the Tech. I'm Andrews here, and of course I'm joined by my co-host Paul Thurrott. How you doing, Paul?
Pretty good.
Pretty good. You're not going anywhere this week, right? You're not traveling.
Actually, I am traveling this week.
Where are you going?
Washington, D.C. for a meeting.
I feel like you've been traveling a whole lot more recently, right?
Well, this is what happens. You know, the winter's dead, usually except for CES, which we skipped this year, and then it just kind of heats up. Like I've got potential trip to China coming up, although this is moving so slowly, it's probably never going to happen. Baltimore, D.C. again, Miami, Seattle, and Vancouver for build. Then we're going to the Netherlands in June for a work thing. Like it's just, it's just
the Paul Thurrott tour.
Yeah, the next couple of months are going to be tiring for sure.
Listen, I think it's a great idea to do like a little tour,
Sure.
Come and see Paul wherever you may be.
Come and watch Paul sleep on a couch. I snore. Bring earplugs.
Yeah. Guys, this is a fun show that we do. I love talking to Paul about technology. The last couple of weeks, the feedback has been unbelievable from you guys. You guys have really been enjoying the conversations that we've been having, and that's always great to hear. I want to remind everybody, if you enjoy the show and you enjoy us continuing to do this, you can fund us on Patreon, patreon.com/whatthetech. That's patreon.com/whatthetech. It pays the bills here. Like it pays Suncast to edit. I could, keep the lights on. And there's a lot of lights to keep on in here. So you could go to patreon.com/whatthetech and fund us there, and you get access to the bonus shows that we do right after this show. Paul, I kind of want to dive right into this. Apple, last week we were talking about the Apple announcement, obviously, with the service that they're having, and following the Apple announcement, it came out that they're not going to release their wireless charging device. And this came after delays. And now they've canceled it. So what?
Yep.
Why? First of all, what issues did Apple have that other companies don't?
Well, so obviously there are wireless chargers. There have been for years. iFixit wrote up something that I think very correctly explains the problem, because what Apple wanted to do was create the type of wireless charger that doesn't exist. And so if you think about a wireless mat, back in the day, I don't remember the exact model, but I had various Lumia phones made by Nokia that supported wireless charging. And they put out these kind of, I don't know, the oval shaped wireless charging pads. And you put the phone on it and it charges it. But the phone had to be correctly positioned on it. There was really a place in the middle that was perfect. In fact, I think the reason they were shaped the way they were was because it sort of looked a little bit like the phone. So you obviously you wouldn't put it askew on it. You would kind of line it up with the shape of the device. And the way iFixit describes that is that there's coils in there, and they create the electromagnetic waves that cause actually heat and the charging to occur. But they're in a particular place in the charging mat. So obviously, or maybe not obviously, but if the phone is off center, you may not actually charge the device at all. And I think people who have used wireless charging have experienced this. Most of them, that you put the thing down, you think it's charging, you go to bed, you wake up in the morning and, oh crap, it's on 21%. It never charged, because it was a little off center. And so what Apple wanted to do was create a wireless charging mat where the entire surface was presented a way to charge. That would do a couple things. A, it would prevent that issue where you don't align it correctly on the device, but it would also support multiple devices, right? And so, in Apple's case, if you had all of the Apple wireless charging devices, an iPhone, an Apple Watch, and AirPods, you could charge all three at the same time, and it wouldn't matter where they were on the mat, right? It's a good idea. Um, I don't remember who it was. I guess some of the Apple blogs, right when this happened, were saying, Apple ran up against the ran up against the reality of physics, and it's like, no, they didn't. Actually, Apple solved the problem.
Yeah.
They did create a wireless charging mat that could charge from anywhere. In fact, anyone can do it. It's kind of like anyone can make an all metal phone if they want. The problem with the phone was that if you make it all metal, the signal can't get out to the radio from the radio, and you can't make a phone call. And that's what happened to the iPhone 4. The problem with the AirPower is that to create something, a wireless charging mat that allows for this, it gives off a lot of electromagnetic interference. And that's actually a serious health issue. The one issue that iFixit raised that was very serious is pacemakers. It can actually cause a pacemaker to stop, so you could kill somebody.
That's scary.
Yeah, so there were regulations here in Europe and elsewhere that have to do with electromagnetic interference. It's for that and for other things that can impact hearing aids. Probably my son's cochlear implant could be disrupted by something like this. And you could cause permanent damage to people with this kind of thing. And so we have regulations, laws, basically, that control the amount of electromagnetic interference that a device can give off. And so, as iFixit explained, I mean, you in the process of building a product like this, the electromagnetic interference is the thing you look at last, And so, if you think about like computers of the past, you might be familiar with like video game systems from the early 1980s or computers where they actually built metal cages inside of the plastic of the device, and that was literally designed to block the electromagnetic interference coming off of all the electronics. These days, we're a little more sophisticated about building things, but it's always been the last thing you look at in the design process. And so Apple got this thing up, it was working. And the suspicion is they got to that last phase and they're like, we can't solve this problem. It also generates a ton of heat, right? And you can imagine the problems associated with heat as well. But I think the big thing was the electromagnetic interference. And so obviously they worked on it for a long time. I think their experience with the iPhone 4, frankly, informed what they were going to do. Remember, Tim Cook is a different person from Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was informed this all metal design is going to prevent this thing from making phone calls. And he said, I don't care, solve the problem. I love this design. And Apple's solution at that time was to make those little gaps, remember, on the outside edge of the iPhone 4. That was supposed to let the radio waves get through. But the problem was someone holding it normally would block those holes. And that's what happened. People would drop phone calls. And then he never apologized. He just, he said, all phones have this problem. That wasn't actually true. And on they went. But this time around, different guy running the show. They can't get around it this time too. Plus, there literally are regulations against this. And they couldn't fix the problem. So I think it's funny. Some people have misunderstood what happened. I had a couple of readers email me saying, oh, this means they're going to give up on wireless charging. And it's like, no, the iPhones still support wireless charging.
Yeah.
You can buy any mat you want. As long as it's Qi compatible. But you'll just be dealing with those limitations. You put the thing on the mat; it has to be in the right place. It's not a big deal, but you can kind of I'd give Apple some credit for wanting to elevate the state of wireless charging and do something truly unique, truly differentiated, truly better. And they just weren't able to pull it off.
Well, what I'm surprised at is how close to, I guess, release time they discovered this. I mean, obviously, this was delayed multiple times, so obviously they've been working on this.
Yeah.
But was there a plan B? I mean, and that was my question here. Would they have had
Yeah.
an option where, or maybe they did, and they said that it's not worth it for them to do it, to have a standard wireless charging device that they sell that may have two spots, for your devices, or
Yeah.
3 points that you could charge on.
Right. Right. You could imagine a mat that had a little icon for an iPhone, a watch, and AirPods or whatever. I guess they could do that. I mean, but I think the market is already pretty well served by wireless charging pads, many of which are very inexpensive. Sometimes you go to Costco, buy a phone, they just give you one, or you get one for cheap or whatever it is. Um, Apple. I'm not. Well, I guess I'm sort of defending it. I sort of appreciate what they're trying to do here. Apple could emulate what everyone else does and just ship a pad that had 2 or maybe 3 spots on it where you could charge things. I don't think it ever occurred to them to do anything like that. I think what they, Apple, this is the Apple of today. And I was discussing this with somebody on Twitter because there's a book coming out about Tim Cook that alleges that he is like the greatest CEO in the history of Apple, and the author makes his case. Well, that might be true. We can kind of debate that or whatever, but um, the Apple of today is not the fire first innovator that a lot of people still think of Apple as. It instead, it kind of carefully looks at what's going on in the world and then moves slowly. But when it does something, it does it right. And so its devices support wireless charging. It works fine. If you have a third party charger, it's fine. I think for the charging mat, what they wanted to do was do something kind of uniquely Apple. They wanted to really elevate the state of it, and it's just not possible. So, they might keep charging. I don't, charging. They might keep trying, but for now, no. I don't know. Apple's not the type of company that is, ever has the plan B. Right? Here's awesome plan A. It's going to be great. If this thing doesn't work out, don't worry. We have this piece of crap over here. Like they
Mobile me.
never, yeah, they don't do well. No, but Mobile Me was the right idea. In fact, they blew it, right? Mobile Me was bad. I mean, I don't mean to say they don't ship things that are terrible. Siri, when it came out the door, was terrible. Apple Maps was terrible when it came out the door. It doesn't mean they don't make mistakes, but I mean, but Mobile Me wasn't like a plan B of something else. It wasn't like they had this awesome idea for a service, couldn't do it, and said, "Let's put out this piece of crap Mobile Me." Like, Mobile Me was supposed to be the awesome service, and it still exists today. They just renamed it because I think the name was tainted. But the service they have today is obviously a lot better than what they originally did.
Yeah, very interesting. I kind of wanted to touch on that because a lot of people were questioning, what Apple's decision was and why, and all this stuff. But I find it interesting. Tim Cook is the greatest CEO of Apple history. That is
A bit
a
of a stretch.
very
Well,
very interesting discussion to have, right?
so here's what. Okay, so it's funny because the the title of the book is Tim Cook, the genius who took Apple to the next level. It's like genius. You're like, okay, that's kind of a stretch, but the author makes an interesting case. The thing I will say is this, and this is a lot like the MacArthur thing from World War II, right? MacArthur was the right guy when you were going through all those terrible islands in the Pacific and trying to beat back the Japanese, and he was the right guy. But if he had ever become president, or if you had left him in charge of the Korean War, he would have nuked China, right? He was an insane person. So, once the story had changed, he wasn't the right guy. And I think the thing about Steve Jobs and Tim Cook that I do believe is true is that Steve Jobs was obviously perfect for Apple at that time, from the late 90s through roughly the time of his death, 2011, because he was able to preside over this crazy era of growth and shepherd these platforms in that made a big difference in the world. But once Apple became this gigantic company, he wasn't really the right person to lead that, because in an era of slow growth and no major new products, that in some ways that would have tarnished his reputation, but he was not actually a good CEO at that scale, whereas Tim Cook is. And on the flip side, Tim Cook could never have done for Apple what Steve Jobs did in the late 90s and the 2000s, right? I mean, he never could have made that happen. But
Well,
they're
Tim
the right
Cook.
people for the times.
I think a lot of people also don't know how much in charge Tim Cook was while Steve Jobs was still at Apple. Tim Cook had a
Well,
tremendous amount of influence and was
yeah.
essentially, running everything. And Steve was the visionary type of guy, which he was great at that. It's an interesting perspective to look at, and you brought it up. Well, how would Apple have evolved in the 2010, in our
Yeah.
decade, this decade, if Steve Jobs,
Oh, it's not like, yeah, Steve Jobs, I think people that look, the guy's mythologized. There's this belief that if he could have lived, there would have been another iPhone level of success story coming. It's like, guys, I'm sorry, but the reality was always going to catch up with Apple. It
But
was
they
always
did,
going to
right?
happen.
But they did have a to a different level, different scale, but they did have another iPhone level of success. They had it with the iPad. They had it with the
Uh,
Apple Watch is the
well,
number one smartwatch to that level. They've had success.
oh, sure they have. No, I know, but it's always tempered. I mean, the problem is when you have that one enormously successful product, you what you want it to be is a halo for everything else you make. And the iPod was to a degree for its time, and then the iPhone absolutely has been ever since it came out. And so, more people bought Macs for a long time. People bought iPads. People bought Apple Watches. People are buying AirPods. Whatever. There is a halo effect, but the problem with that kind of thing, when everything is based around the one product, they're still basing this on the services thing, right? I mean, is you're really in a lot of trouble if something goes wrong with that one product. And there have been little things, and we'll see, and sales have gone down. You're really dependent on that one product, and unfortunately, you've set a high or a low level of success for these other things. None of them are ever going to explode beyond it. No one is ever. They're never going to sell more iPads than iPhones. They're never going to sell more AirPods than iPhones, right? Because that's how they're used with that thing, usually. And it's just, it's these businesses are never going to be that big. But the thing people need to remember is that, for like enthusiasts, it's like, yeah, like it was Apple was so much cooler under Steve Jobs. Like I completely agree with that. But Apple today is also 3 times bigger than it ever was under Steve Jobs, like 3 times bigger. It's one of the biggest companies in the world, if not the biggest, depending on
It's
how
like
you
a
want to
small
measure it.
country. They have enough. They have more
Yeah,
money
Steve
than
Jobs, the I'm a dickhead and I'm going to park in the handicap parking spot and I don't care what anyone thinks and I'm never going to apologize and all that stuff. That was cute, when you're a scrappy up and coming, company or whatever. But that would never fly in a company like Apple of
yeah.
today, and he would have been detrimental to Apple today. And it's hard for people to wrap their heads around that. But
I think it goes with the mythology of Steve Jobs. You know what is amazing though, and this says a lot. We spent about 10 minutes on Steve Jobs as a what if.
mhm.
You don't really hear that on the Microsoft side, right? You never hear what if Bill Gates was still running the show, or what if
Oh
Ballmer was
well,
still CEO. You
yeah.
don't really see that.
So it's funny you mention that because Brad and I were just talking today with regards to the Surface book that he had put out, and one of the things that I feel really strongly about is that Steve Ballmer was hired to continue the Bill Gates legacy and to continue Microsoft as a business the way that Bill Gates had been doing things. But the thing he doesn't get the credit for is realizing over time that that wasn't working anymore. And he changed Microsoft, and a lot of the things we now associate with the Microsoft of today under Satya Nadella actually started under Steve Ballmer, and people kind of gloss over that. You got to understand that this guy so thoroughly understood how Microsoft had to change that he offered to and then did step down because he understood that no one was ever going to believe this company was different if one of the old guard was still running it. And that there were all these factions inside of Microsoft. It was what I think of as old Microsoft doing things the old way. And they were never going to turn things around. They really needed new blood for that to happen and for it to be clear to the world, both inside of Microsoft and outside, that things were different. So the changes that have occurred since Satya Nadella came into power at Microsoft, yes, I mean many of them, did originate with him. Many of them did not, but I believe that they're partially have succeeded because of the change in leadership. That if Steve Ballmer had stayed and tried to do the same thing, it wouldn't have been successful in turning the ship around.
Yeah, it's a very interesting conversation to have. I want to continue this, but before we continue, I want to thank our sponsor, and that's Rocket Loans, guys. We've been talking about this for a while. If you are looking for either a small loan or something up to $35,000, anywhere from $2,000 to $35,000, you can do so at Rocket Loans, and they make it very simple for you. Go to rocketloans.com/whatthetech. It's simple and secure online process. You pre-approved offers within seconds, no prepayment or penalties, pay off anytime. Personal loans are made simple. Now, I know the holidays passed, but a lot of people are still shopping, still spending money. And if you're looking to consolidate and bring everything together, why not do so with a very easy loan to do? This is great for debt consolidation, home improvements, and large purchases. And this is part of Quicken Loan family companies. Just go to rocketloans.com/whatthetech. That's rocketloans.com/whatthetech. And you could get started there today. I want to thank Rocket Loans for supporting the show. To kind of go back to this, which is interesting. What other companies have that mythology? Does that exist anywhere outside of the ecosystem, the Apple
Yeah, but
ecosystem and the
not
Apple
yeah,
phone?
yeah, not in well, yes. I mean, so
Well, Lee
if you go
Iacocca, that's one.
well, well, actually, that's not one because
Well, we found out later
Lee
on,
Iacocca.
but
No, but he came to Chrysler later in life. He was a Ford executive, right? I
yeah.
mean, he's not like in our industry, I would say, Hewlett Packard, those two guys had that back in the day. We forget this now because HP is two different companies and it's completely different. But They were like that. I mean, Hewlett Packard in many ways set um, the stage for later Silicon Valley companies with their own mythologies. You know, the Apple co-founders had that, Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs, and the other guy, because there was a third guy. I mean, I forget his name now. Not Mike Markula, but there's a third Apple co-founder, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Um, you know, Gates involvement, yeah. Gates and Allen had that for sure from Microsoft.
Ronald Wayne?
Ronald Wayne, I think that's correct. Yeah, there was a third guy that kind of bowed out early. Um, you know, Gary Kildall at DR Digital Research was kind of like that, you know. But in the modern era, I think, you know, there's a mythology around Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook, isn't there? I mean, they've made a movie
Yeah.
about the guy. Um,
And very
I don't.
early on, they made a movie about him, right? And that's fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, you know, people forget this. You know, Bill Gates and Microsoft were so powerful in the industry, and maybe you can help me remember the name of it because I can't think of it off the top of my head. But there was actually a movie made, and I think it was Tim Robbins played the bad guy, who was the Bill Gates character. And it was about a software company. It was going to release a new platform of their, you know, new version of their platform. It was going to take over the world. And there was a young guy who it was either Hayden Christensen or Ryan, somebody was like the young hacker guy who got in and who was so excited to work for this company. And then he realized they were evil and they were going to take over the world. And he kind of, you know,
Not
he fixed
Pirates of Silicon Valley.
no, this is a no, this is like a
Okay.
fictional thing. I think it's Tim Robbins. Is that the right name? Tim. Oh
Let's see.
boy, it's a fictional take on Microsoft, you know, and it's
Oh, wait a minute.
you know, like this
Antitrust with
antitrust.
Ryan
Yeah, I think
Felipe.
that's it.
I went
Ryan
to
Phillip. Thank
see
you.
this movie. I
Yep.
actually saw this movie in the theaters.
Oh, I probably did too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so Bill Gates, you know, and Microsoft was so central to our understanding of personal technology in the 1990s. They were so everything that there was like a movie about like Bill Gates as, you know, the emperor from Star Wars, essentially taking over the world. You know, no, I mean it's crazy. I mean, you look at
Yeah.
him now, and he's like this elderly philanthropist who's doing
Yeah.
all the right things for the world.
Just
It's
giving
like
to the
completely,
world. Yeah.
yeah, he's completely turned it around. You know,
That's
but
also
yeah,
perception of, you know, that was put into people's heads that he was this maniacal, you know, tyrannical.
no. Bill Gates was the Antichrist. I
Oh, he
want to be
was.
really clear
Okay.
about that. Yeah,
Okay.
he was a terrible person. Um, but he really did turn it around. I mean, yeah, Bill Gates and Microsoft are terrible. There's no doubt about it. Yeah, you know, we talk a lot about the influence that tech companies have today over our lives, and they really do. They're the one thing that we can say today, at least, is that no one company is ever going to dominate the industry like Microsoft did. The negative side is that companies like Google and even Apple, I would say, but especially online services companies, social media networks, have the ability to impact so many more people. It's just frightening, like the level of privacy that people can give up and personal information is something that Microsoft never had the ability to do back in the 1990s or whatever.
Well,
But
to kind of touch on that, right? And I was not planning on going down this road with this show, but I'm enjoying this conversation. So I'm just throwing
Mhm.
out everything, and I'm gonna start over with this.
Okay,
Uh,
that's all right.
with Microsoft, however, you know, it's their history is fascinating because if those antitrust issues had not have happened,
Yeah,
they would have had a very different path in the
right, right.
2000s. You know, Microsoft was kind of tiptoeing around at that point where, you know, which it opened up competition and allowed services like
Yeah,
Firefox and other and Chrome to kind of gain dominance. But Microsoft, the story of Microsoft would have been a very different story in the 2000s if those antitrust issues had not have happened.
yeah. You know, it's an easy thing to say because it's true, but companies like Google and Apple, when it became resurgent under Steve Jobs and a few others, like that stuff could never have happened had Microsoft not been hobbled by antitrust. That would have been a different world. It's impossible to speculate what that would have looked like. But the dark side to that is, you know, we are so advanced now with these mobile devices and online services and all this stuff. This was stuff that Microsoft would have squashed, right? In the same way, we're just talking about Apple, and they basically have this one product that everything revolves around. Well, Microsoft did too. That product was Windows, and anything that threatened Windows was going to be destroyed by Microsoft, right? And that includes things internal to Microsoft. There were Microsoft projects to go off in different directions that were killed because it threatened Windows.
Give me an
And
example. I'm curious about that.
well, like early on there was this one kind of goes directly against Office, but it kind of ties into the basic notion, which is that there was Microsoft very early on had basically developed like a web apps platform, and they were going to release as the first kind of wave of it this thing called Office. I think it was Office Open Doc, no Office Doc. I'm getting the name wrong, but it was basically a web-based Office productivity suite. It was killed by Steven Sinofsky, who ran Office at the time, but the reason being that it would compete with like full-blown Office, which was another one of Microsoft's pillars at that time. But the reality was like the underlying platform that would have driven this thing would have challenged Windows, right? And so Microsoft went after Netscape because Netscape said that the web was going to take over and Windows wouldn't be important anymore. At the time, that seemed kind of ludicrous, but Microsoft took that seriously enough that they, obviously we know what they did to Netscape. Netscape was destroyed. Um, Internally, Microsoft was developing other things. It was a much more sophisticated web platform than the basic web. It was proprietary technology. I mean, that's what Microsoft did back then. But you can look at things like ActiveX, and I'm forgetting some of this stuff. They had crazy proprietary web technologies at the time. It would have been based on stuff like that, but it was seen as a platform that could rival Windows. And it's like if this thing takes off and you could run Office apps like on the web from any web browser on any platform, then Windows won't be important again. We're not doing this. And there's a lot of that kind of stuff. It's Microsoft would have been very protectionist, and it would have done a combination of things. It would have pre-announced products because other people were doing them, and then they would have released their own version eventually, or not at all, and it would be crappy and not as good as the thing the other company was going to make. Or they would just destroy it outright and do change Windows in some way that made this other thing non-important anymore. And I think it would have slowed the development down of all this stuff that we have today that not that it maybe wouldn't have happened eventually, but Microsoft would have used their market power to undermine competitors in a way that they couldn't, frankly. I mean,
Eh,
there are things like Zune or Windows Phone or Bing, which are the butt of jokes today, but primarily because Microsoft couldn't do to those competitors, the iPod, the iPhone, and Google Search, what they had done earlier to WordPerfect and Lotus and Borland and IBM and Netscape, and the list kind of goes on and on and on. I mean, it's imagine I just like this. Here's an idea. Just put this idea in your head. Just like consider this. Samsung. We know that Samsung has an operating system of its own. We know that Samsung has been replacing apps in Android with their own apps for years. They've developed their own services. They've created their own Google Assistant knockoff called Bixby, right? Now imagine if Android Q is coming out in the fall and Google starts giving out the licenses to Android Q, and they give them to LG and Nokia and, Huawei and everyone but Samsung, right? And the thing comes out and the new system's there, and now Samsung's getting ready to come out with a new set of phones like they do every year, and they're like, we'd like to have the latest version of the OS, please. And they're like, yeah, you're not getting it. That's what Microsoft did to IBM,
yeah.
right? It's exactly what they did to IBM. And IBM's PCs in 1995 shipped with the Windows 3.1 because they couldn't get the license, or with OS 2, because they couldn't get the license for Windows 95. They waited several months. They blew that business out of the water as a retaliatory gesture because IBM was developing its own platform and was potentially a threat to Windows.
In
You
reality,
can't.
would it have been a threat, you think? In
What's
reality?
that?
Do you think it would have been a
Um,
realistic threat to Windows at that point? 94,
it was
95,
a realistic
96.
threat. So the thing that, yeah, so the thing that OS 2 had was, it was a really clean, object oriented, well designed, memory resilience, platform. It could run Windows apps, right? And so Microsoft withheld the license for Windows 95 in two ways. One was the way I described. The other one was they never gave IBM the ability to run Windows 95 apps, and that effectively killed OS 2 because what people were looking for was a better platform than Windows, but they needed the Windows apps to still run. And with OS 2, all they could do was run Windows 3.1 apps. And so they killed it. It was just like, sorry, the license, go back and look at the license. It says you can only do Windows 3.1. And that's the type of company they were, and that type of behavior, I mean, well, first of all, they did go to antitrust court, so this was entered, this is one of the things that was used as evidence against Microsoft because they did do it. Um, but this is the type of thing you really probably couldn't get away with today. And you would never, and Google would never try. I mean, as much as people whatever people think of Google, imagining them trying to do that to another company, I can't even imagine. It's not, you can't imagine it. Like, it's not, they do stupid stuff. I mean, they make mistakes and they, whatever, but them being like retaliating against one of their own partners.
Well,
I mean, the
I think
Samsung
for them,
example.
in the sense, have they been
Good.
put in positions for them to feel serious threat to retaliate to that extent? And that's a great question that to kind of think about. All these companies that exist right now,
Yeah.
they will retaliate if they feel threatened. I think in Google's case,
like,
they don't
like a
feel
trap.
threatened because they have
Well,
everything.
so Google should, okay. So, well, I mean, we're kind of going in an interesting Google direction here because the one thing that's kind of strange to me about Android is how inept Google has been leveraging Android in other areas, right? And so they've done things like they make smartwatches and wearables. They make, well, actually, they killed it, but they had an IoT platform that was based on Android. Their Android-based things have never seemed to take off, whereas Apple's have. Apple's seen great success working off of the iPhone. So, y you know, Google's, platform is kind of singular, like, it hasn't had a lot of external success, like, the Google Assistant, Google Home stuff is maybe one example that contradicts what I just said. That's actually done pretty well. But if you could if you, like, we'll say Samsung, could take Tizen and run Android apps on this thing, and you don't need Android anymore, and they don't need Android anymore. They don't have to ship all the built-in Google apps anymore. They can start shipping just their apps. Well, that thing is a threat because Android is this thing that runs on whatever the number is, 4 or 5 billion different devices worldwide. I mean, Samsung is still the number one maker of phones. They think about this all the time. They're working toward this. I mean, at some point, they might be able to walk away from Google. They want to. And, so could Google retaliate against that company? I don't, I just don't see them doing it. But I mean, maybe they would have to. I don't know.
Maybe, but
I guess I
but
don't
if you
know.
think about it, Google's top revenue source still 20 something percent of their revenue, or I believe it's around 15, 16 billion, probably more now, is
Yeah.
at Google Ads. It's AdSense.
Yeah.
Um,
And right. But that's the reason Android's free, right?
yeah, that's the reason why
Because
Android's free.
you're going
Yeah.
to be running Google apps and services on top of that, and this thing's going to feed the ad engine. So I can assure you that this Tizen thing, I'm imagining, I'm just making this up. I have no idea if they're ever going to do this, but I mean, if they could figure out a way to run Android apps on that, well, they've just cut off Google's source of revenue. And now they are threatening Google.
By the way, it's 52 billion. I apologize. I was off by a couple billion here on Google's source.
Right.
Their adverts served by Google on other pages, it's 15 billion. It's 52 billion adverts on Google websites and 67 total, $67 billion. That's the thing. If this starts dipping, right? If they start
Oh, it
losing,
has.
it has. No, it has, but not
I
to.
mean,
But where has it gone? I think people have kind of
yeah.
it's dipped because of the nature of the internet and how information is provided. If
Yeah.
this starts dipping heavily to a competitor,
Right.
and I
Right.
don't
Right. Right.
see that. To be
That
honest,
hasn't
I find
happened.
that,
Yeah.
and I
No,
don't
that
see
hasn't
that
happened.
happening.
No. And,
Right now.
but Google knows that it is, like, we just talked about Windows for Microsoft. We talked about iPhone for Apple. Ads for Google is the same thing. I don't know where they're at exactly, but ads used to be 95+% of Google's revenues. Today, it's probably closer to 70. Maybe someone could look this up and find out what the exact number is. But ads are still the number one source of revenue at Google by far. In fact, when you look at all of Alphabet, the the percentage actually gets higher because the rest of Alphabet is losing money. And the Google stuff kind of props it up even further. But they are wise, just like Apple is, to seek revenues from other sources because anything that attacks that one major source of income could have huge ramifications for the company in a negative sense. And we know what Google or Apple's approach is. We're going after services primarily. Google's approach, is so far it's been some combination of enterprise services, which by which I mean like G Suite and associated services, and then cloud computing, which they've not been super successful at, meaning things that compete with Azure and Amazon AWS.
And
They're
that
kind
seems
of
to
a
be Microsoft's
distant third.
focus now, right? That they really, if you really
Yeah.
look at it, Microsoft is getting into heavy competition with Amazon when you really
Yeah,
look
but,
at
it
services.
y right, but they're not doing it with one product, right? I mean, people, a lot of times they think of, like, Azure, and they're like, "Azure, it's this one thing." Azure is this is I'm just making this a number up, but it's like 11,000 services, and Azure is not all of the cloud services that Microsoft has. They have all kinds of other cloud services that are not included in the Azure bubble. So, the Microsoft of today is a much more diverse business. If some part of the Azure business failed for some reason, some set of services didn't do well, depending on what it was, honestly, a lot of people wouldn't even notice because they have so many products and services now. Whereas if, the Microsoft of old, when it was just Windows or when it was really just Windows Office Server, if one of those things had a really bad quarter or a really bad year, everyone would notice, right? Because that would have a major impact. That's why when iPhone sales kind of tanked, and by tanked we mean they still sold like tens of millions of units, but it went down from the year ago quarter. The the whole world noticed, didn't it?
Yeah,
The
because
whole
it
world
hadn't
noticed.
happened. It
It was the
hadn't
biggest
happened.
news story. It was the biggest thing in the world. Not only had it not happened, but let's put it this way: like iPad sales had gone down at Apple, I think, for 6 years in a row, maybe longer. It was a minor story. iPhone sales go down for 1 quarter. It's the biggest story in the world.
Yeah, because
That's
you
how
know
important
why?
the iPhone is to Apple.
It's
It's big.
noticeable, right?
Yeah, it's
People,
big.
it's noticeable to on a consumer level as well, on an
Yep.
everyday level. You know what phone I'm still using? What iPhone? iPhone 7 Plus. Why haven't I gotten a new one? I
Right.
mean, that's
Why
a question to ask.
haven't you, Andrew?
Why
Why?
haven't I? Why haven't I?
Why don't
Uh,
you recognize that Tim Cook is the greatest CEO that Apple has ever had and throw him some money?
you know what, Tim? I'll cut you a check. Okay, I'll write it right now. I apologize. No, but I mean but that's a lot of people. That's a lot of people. The urgency and the mystique that Apple had for a lot of people. The lines around the door. Remember that craziness.
Yeah.
The Apple Store, the line around the door during first of all, that line around the
Yeah,
door
but
thing. I'm gonna tell you something about it. There was a lot of that was an illusion. And if you
Mhm.
looked at the people online, there was a major problem in those early days. What they were doing, people were buying those phones and shipping them back to their home country. That was
Sure.
the line around the door where I walked by.
Right.
I forgot. I'm gonna say it was the iPhone 4. Okay, I'm not 100% iPhone 4 or iPhone 4S. I was walking by the Apple Store the day of the release,
Right.
and I looked at the line. If I told you there was about 30 Chinese grandmothers on that line, back
Right.
to back, and I'm standing and I stopped and I thought to myself, they can't all be waiting for iPhones. You know, they're not there for their iPhone purchase. They were there to purchase it for whoever else and then send it back. And that was part of that mystique, part of that look at the lines around the door. Nobody really looked in until later on and they realized, oh, there's a problem here. And they stopped that with the cash purchases. Right? Was that
So
around the time they stopped those cash purchases? I'm trying to
I
remember
don't
which
remember.
iPhone it
You know,
was.
I the so I what I do I don't remember the exact details of this, but I know that Apple wanted to stop the store thing, the store line, right? That at some point it kind of realized this is a problem, right? And you have to kind of wonder because people today are like, literally, on Twitter were saying, "Remember when Apple used to have lines around the door? You never see that anymore." No, that's true, but if you look at the sales like over an opening weekend for an iPhone today compared to back when you did see those lines, they're probably 10 times higher. And they're just doing it a lot more efficiently and they're doing it online and they have this incredible system where everyone's done this or bought an iPhone. You buy an iPhone, you get the email, "Hey, good news, your product shipped," and it's in Shenzhen or somewhere, and it goes to Alaska, and then it goes to Seattle, and then it goes to wherever you live. Um, they have an incredible process for shipping the stuff to you directly from China, very efficiently, very quickly. Um, I'm sure there are security and safety issues associated with people standing in line and whatever,
Oh,
but
sure.
and maybe part of it too is just they kind of understood that at some point this is going to slow down. And what they didn't want to see was stories about, hey, remember there used to be lines at the Apple Store? Well, now there aren't because nobody wants these stupid phones anymore. I mean, the story really turned into Apple's tired of having these lines. We're gonna not do this anymore. And they kind of managed that one. I mean, I'm look. Anyone can look at a business like that and say, "Hey, it's going to slow down someday," you know.
Mm-hmm.
And you got all this great press for it when it was happening. You're going to get really bad press for it when it stops happening. And so maybe that was part of it. They just wanted to get ahead of that story. I don't know, but
It is
look, Apple
interesting, yeah.
releases are still humongous. I don't think anyone could claim that the iPhone, 10s, 10s Max, 10R launch as, I guess, were not humongous for this company. It's literally tens of millions of units, right? Within days.
I think the big story's in that 10R. I think there's something to be talked about that, which I want to kind of talk about that because I know many people that have bought that. I want to thank a new sponsor to the show, and this is great for content creators. I know a lot of you guys create your own content. You make your own videos. You make YouTube videos. You do podcasts. A tremendous amount of our audience are they're content creators. We want to welcome Storyblocks to the show. Storyblocks.com/whatthetech. You can learn more about Storyblocks video. You could purchase how this works, which is great. You get unlimited downloads with Storyblocks. So you go to storyblocks.com, you could get studio quality 4K stock videos without blowing the budget. I know how expensive this gets. We're going to redo our intro, and we find stuff all the time, and sometimes it's the wrong resolution, sometimes it's not what we exactly want, and you can't really return something like this, right? When you purchase a video package that maybe doesn't work, you can't return it. This is the great thing about it. You get unlimited downloads. Anything in the video member library is yours to download as much as you want, including HD and 4K footage, After Effects templates, which is actually great, motion background, and more when you sign up for an unlimited video plan. Download anything from your audio, from their audio platform to image library, and of course the video and the sound effects and all that stuff. It's phenomenal. I have an account for them, and that's how I kind of discovered this because we were looking for a new intro, and this was one of the most affordable ones I have seen out there. Also, another thing, if you're a YouTube content creator, you could use the content anywhere, including YouTube. All the content is royalty free for commercial and personal use, so there's no catch with that. I know that a lot of some of these other platforms don't allow commercial use, which you can with Storyblocks. New clips are added all the time, so there's always something fresh to use and spark your creativity. I absolutely love these guys, and I encourage you to check them out at storyblocks.com/whatthetech. That's storyblocks.com/whatthetech. They have all these amazing things, like you get an aerial drone shot of the Statue of Liberty that you couldn't find someplace else or it was too expensive. They have all these awesome stuff, and the After Effects templates are tremendous. Storyblocks.com/whatthetech. Yeah, I think we dived into a very different conversation here, but when you talk about perception with purchases and stuff, I think the unspoken discussion is the success of the iPhone 10R.
Yeah, I mean,
It's not a
it's
cheap iPhone, when you think about it.
no, but it's cheap compared to the flagships, and it is a new phone. It does have the same internals as the other phones, which I think is part of what adds up to it being such kind of a sweet spot for the lineup. The problem for the iPhone 10R, unfortunately, is that it's been kind of lost in this bad news around declining iPhone sales. But you're right. I mean, it's the best-selling iPhone model, new iPhone model, maybe the best, I guess, best-selling overall. It's goofy to me, by the way, that Apple does not make cases for this thing. They have one case. It's clear. It's terrible. It's really hard to put on and take off. The iPhone 10s and 10s Max have dozens of leather and what's that other material they use? The kind of rubbery, whatever it is, other type of case, plasticky case. And the iPhone 10R has nothing. I don't know why. It's their best-selling phone. Why wouldn't they have cases for it? It's too
Yeah.
bad.
Well, they don't want you to buy it. That's what it
Yeah,
is.
it's a great phone. It's a
Yeah.
really nice iPhone.
I said we'll do a little Q&A at the end. Are you up to do
Mhm.
that? So,
Sure.
somebody asked me, what do you think of Toshiba's name change? Do you think it'll help business in North America?
I have I haven't even what are you talking about?
Toshiba
What have
changed
they
their name.
I didn't hear this. When was this?
Yeah. I'll tell you right now. Let me pull this up. He sent me a link. I can
That is
pull it up, it'll
amazing.
be great.
I did not even know about that.
Yeah, Toshiba is changing their business name for their laptop. I think it's called Dynabook.
Oh, okay. I yes. Okay. I'm sorry. The commercial PC business
Yeah,
is becoming Dynabook Americas.
Dynabook.
Oh, jeez.
Which I find that fascinating because
Yeah.
either that
Okay.
means that the Toshiba brand wasn't
Mhm.
selling or their branding was extremely tainted in North America.
Yeah, I think it's both. Toshiba has a rich history in the PC business. Let me think about this. The first PC laptop that I ever actually purchased was a used Toshiba Satellite Pro that a guy I worked with owned, and he had bought the new one. And back then, I mean, these things were rock solid. They were beautiful machines. But over the years, obviously the laptop landscape has changed. There are newer companies that have much better mind share and usage share, market share. And yeah, I bet it's just the Toshiba. It's such a Japanese brand. Maybe that doesn't resonate anymore. At the time, Japanese companies were seen as the premier level of quality, right, and style and that kind of thing. I mean, in the same way that Sony has kind of fallen apart as a consumer electronics giants in the face of companies like Apple, Toshiba, and other companies, I think have fallen by the wayside. And today it's because of Chinese companies, right? I mean, um, like a Huawei MateBook, whatever they're called these days. I mean, that's an amazing laptop. So
I
I
had
hadn't heard that. That's weird. I'm still trying
mhm.
to process that. That's funny.
Yeah, because they sold majority of the business to Sharp. I know
Yeah,
that, and Sharp was selling them, and then now they're rebranded.
yeah,
I only have had very minimal experience with Toshiba, and my story is that my first laptop was a Toshiba. Actually, it was a
right.
ThinkPad, but I had a like a modern laptop. I
Hmm.
had a Toshiba, and this thing was a piece of junk, and it was a class action lawsuit, and they gave me a
Oh,
brand new
jeez.
Toshiba. They said
Okay.
we'll either give you $1,200 or you can get another laptop, and just
Right.
ship this one back because it actually the fan there was a fire in I mean it was smoking. It was so bad the thing
Oh,
died,
jeez.
and they said ship it back. We'll give you a new one. It was part of the class action lawsuit,
Yeah.
and this is after 2 years of having it. So I just shipped them a broken laptop. They shipped me a new one, and then there was a
Mhm.
class action lawsuit for that laptop,
Oh,
and they
boy.
shipped me another one. They gave me three Toshibas back to back.
Yeah.
Every 2 years, I got a brand new Toshiba, and they were all pieces of crap. I mean, they were terrible.
Well, there were
They were
the Dynabook thing that we're talking about is the commercial line. So this would replace probably what used to be called Protege, and they had a few other lines like the
satellite
consumer
protege.
products from Toshiba weren't that great. My mother had a gigantic Toshiba laptop, which was
That's all they
not,
made. Those gigantic
yeah,
17-inch laptops.
yeah. Well, for consumers, but they made
Yeah.
really nice machines for business. Um, I'm going to go out on a limb now that I've been confronted by this fact and suggest that this thing's going to disappear, just like Vio did. The Sony brand. I realize they're still around, but I mean they're effectively a non-event, so that's too
You
bad.
know, only if they came around a little later, they would have been the Apple of the PC market, right? When it was justified. Now it's justified to spend twenty
Well, I
twenty
mean,
hundred dollars on a
arguably,
laptop.
Sony Vio was the Apple
They
of the
were, yeah.
laptop market, right, for a little while. You used to go to remember they had Sony style stores, and they would have TVs and whatever the PlayStation was of the day, DVD players, and Blu-ray as that happened, whatever. But they had the little MP3 players, various kinds, and then they had these laptops, and they were very stylish. They used to push. What was that memory format they used to have? Memory stick, I think.
Oh, the long one.
Yeah, the little chiclet gum looking thing,
Oh God, what was
and,
the name?
all their laptops supported that instead of, SD or compact flash or whatever was the thing at the
Proprietary
time.
nonsense.
Yeah, they were big on that. Yeah, Sony dug their own grave.
Yeah, listen, they Sony is an amazing story to think about, and I'd like to do like a little piece on them in one of the shows that we do because they literally they controlled the TV market. They were known as a premium TV manufacturer.
Yeah.
They
Yep.
were making these beautiful laptops, and then they just couldn't survive.
Well, you heard the story, they're consolidating all of their consumer electronics into a single business, and so, their phone, business has been hemorrhaging cash for a long time. They're hoping to get that together by 2021 or whatever. That business is going away. It's dead. I think the only thing that Sony does that makes money these days, well, actually, it all technically makes money, but an appreciable amount of money is probably the PlayStation business, frankly, in consumer electronics. You know, Viva, V, what's the name of the
Vivo.
company? The cheap, what is it? The TV brand?
Oh, Vizio.
Uh, Vizio. Vizio and companies like Vizio killed the TV thing. You know, Sony used to be able to market themselves as like the premier brand for that kind of stuff. And I just went to Costco yesterday randomly, and there was this beautiful, like, you know, QLED something something TV, and I was looking at it and I was thinking to myself, you know, whenever this TV I have out there dies, and it'll probably be a couple of years. There's nothing wrong with it, right? I mean, you know, maybe we'll grab something like this. I wonder how expensive this thing is because it's so gorgeous. I look at the price and it was like 499. I
I
was like,
know.
are
Wild.
you kidding me?
Wild.
Like I paid more than double that for the TV I have, and this thing is like, you know,
Well, the
way
T
nicer looking.
before you bought a TV to sit there for a decade,
Yeah,
even when I had I
yeah,
had a plasma, I had a Hitachi plasma that I kept for many, many years until I replaced it with a Toshiba. But now the
yeah.
technology is shifting so quickly with televisions, I can't justify
I
spending $1,500
yeah,
on a TV.
I used to always buy Sony equipment. You know, back when you would have um, you know, a stereo receiver that you would connect to speakers and to like a double cassette thing, and then a CD player at first, and then it was like what do you call it, like a 5 disc tray. It was always Sony equipment. Like all of it was Sony. I love Sony. I used to love going to the Sony store. That Sony store that I was describing earlier. Seriously, it was the original Apple store. We had one in the at the Prudential, well, near the Prudential Mall in Boston. There was a big one out in San Francisco. I'm sure they were all over, but you know, this is just like they're just it's just it's like a Blockbuster Video. You don't see these things anymore. They're just gone, you know?
It's like one left in Anchorage.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
exactly.
really
I'm
what's
sure there's
happened
a
to 'em.
Sony style store somewhere. It's probably in Japan.
It has to be the most. I'll give you a great Sony story. I worked for a Japanese company. I did IT for them. They made staplers. It's called
Okay.
Max. They made staplers and rebarring equipment. They had an office here in the States. And the CEO at the time, his brother was a VP at Sony.
Mhm.
And we were having a conversation, and he was saying how uh, it's a bad sign for Sony when he gave his son a Sony MP3 player,
Yeah,
and the son said, "I don't want this. I want an iPhone."
right. Exactly.
And he knew it's not good when the CEO's son is kind of turning his nose up at
I
a MP3 player from Sony.
Yeah, I'm not gonna get the dates or the names right, but there was a time when Sony I've talked about this a few times, I think, on the show, that Sony one year launched an MP3 player that looked like a pen, and then there was a more normal looking MP3 player that was you could choose between them. They supported their own proprietary music format, right? So if you wanted to get music on this thing, well, you could do MP3 files, but their service was proprietary. It was their own. It was goofy. It was whatever. And a friend of mine was so anti-Apple, he just couldn't deal with iPod. So yeah, we actually went to the store the day these things first became available, and you know, in New York City, and you know, he purchased one of these things, and he returned it like the next morning. You know, it was just so terrible. They just shot themselves in the foot.
I got a
Just terrible.
I got a funny question here. Paul, what do you think of the passing of Google Inbox?
This is the worst thing that's said. Well, okay, actually, I will say there's a silver lining. So, look, huge Google Inbox fan and user. Used it on the desktop, meaning on the web and on mobile. Million times better than any other email client. But I'm not giving Google credit here. It was not their intent. But because they killed it, it forced me to look at other things. And in the course of doing that, I discovered that the way I was aggregating email was causing me to lose emails.
Oh,
So
interesting.
where I'm yeah, it's one of those things like I this is the type of thing I do this a lot, and I think maybe this is a very human thing. I don't know, but you kind of figure something out, or you do something a certain way and it works, and then you stop thinking about it. And I just I had looked at this years ago. I'm going to push everything through a central Google account. I'm going to use the Google Inbox interface to it. It's essentially a Gmail account, but Google Inbox. And I'm going to forward my email from my other accounts to that account. I'm going to configure that account to be able to write and respond to emails as if from that account. Everything goes through one place. It seems like a great system, but what I discovered when I chopped it all up, because again, I was looking at alternatives, and I didn't want everything to go through one thing if it wasn't going to work right. So I separated my email accounts back out, and started pulling them separately. All of a sudden, I started getting these emails I had stopped getting years ago. And I realized, oh my God, this thing, some combination of these services somehow, I don't know why. I don't know if it's multiple spam filters, whatever. I was losing emails. So the truth is today, I'm using Windows Mail in Windows 10, which I hate. It's a terrible product. It's awful. I'm using Outlook Mobile on phone, which is fine. That's a
Hey,
good
can I
one.
can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Why do you use Windows Mail and not Outlook? Considering
Oh, I hate
how much
Outlook.
email you do.
Outlook is the worst. Outlook is a battleship when what I need is a little rowboat. The things that I valued about Inbox where it's simplicity, it's minimalist user interface, and it didn't overwhelm me with options. When an email comes in, I want to read it, I want to deal with it, and I want to be done with it. And it really excelled at that kind of thing. If I didn't want to, if there was nothing to be done with it and I was done, I could archive it or delete it. I would typically archive it. It doesn't matter. Reply, archive, that kind of thing. It was just so simple. And there's all this crap around email, especially, Gmail and Outlook, the two big pig programs. Um, I just loved what they did. Inbox was so smart. And I sort of hoped when they got rid of Inbox, they would make an inbox mode for Gmail. So yeah, I go to Gmail URL, but it's like, they don't do that. They just pile on um more and more features. It's like Outlook is the same way. So Outlook is a program that it dates back to a program called Schedule Plus. Schedule Plus was really a kind of calendar, like I call it calendar. It was for meetings essentially, and so they tacked an email thing onto it. Contacts management. In the beginning, it was proprietary Microsoft email only, Mappy. Eventually, they added support for internet email. Even today, like if you use a Google account, like a Gmail or a G Suite account, you cannot use Microsoft Outlook.
Mm-mm.
It is the worst.
Yeah.
And what I sort of liken it to is it's like an archaeological dig when you go down into the ground and you can see all the strata, and like here's where the dinosaurs were wiped out, here's where the little mammals came, and you know it's all this crap just piled on top of each other and is plopped out in front of
Can
you.
we
It's just I hate it.
can we take a moment and discuss the PTSD that I have from having to split PST files?
I was I was hoping when you said
Uh,
PTSD you were going to lead to PST.
Of course I'm
The
lead.
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
have PST syndrome. You for people who don't remember this, and God, I hope you never experienced it or remember this. This is a non-existing memory. If your PST files got too big
Right.
in I think prior to 2003, right? Or no, 2003 would do it too. Outlook 2003 would do that problem too. It was limited with the size. It would grind your life to a halt
Yeah.
where you had to now split these files. And by the way, it
Yeah.
was not, it never worked right. Things would go wrong all the time. And
Well, I mean,
it
that was the
was,
architecture of the app. It was very much designed.
oh my
You're,
God.
it's you're on this PC, and that's where that file is. I used to know people who'd carry around a copy of the PST files,
Dude,
because you couldn't afford to lose this thing.
I still have all mine backed up. And can I tell you, embarrassingly, they're backed up
Yeah,
on zip drives.
sure, sure.
I have zip drives that say Outlook PST1, Outlook PST2, Outlook. I mean, this goes on.
So
Insanity.
the more modern approach for this, and this is, by the way, Microsoft,
Set
even
it on
Windows Mail
fire.
and Windows. Well, okay, but Windows Mail and Windows 10 does this. Mobile email clients do this. The service is managed in the cloud. The aggregation occurs in the client. They will provide like a linked inbox view or whatever they call it, like a single view. When you archive an email, it archives to the right account. Obviously, you don't have to think about that stuff. Um, you know, you you basically configure it like I want the last 30 days or 90 days or whatever of email, and that's it on this device. And you can sync them to any device. It's portable. It's lightweight. It makes sense. Outlook is just the opposite of all that stuff.
Very
Um,
passionate about my hatred towards PST files.
yeah, well, no, it's of course, it's like it's like a spousal abuse. You're never going to forget it. You might
Oh
forgive
man,
them, you might
I
not, but you're
was.
never going to forget it.
I guess we could dive into it a little bit, but I did IT. For people who don't know, I'm not that much of an idiot in real life.
Mhm.
I may play one a little bit on the show, and I may ask Paul dumb questions, but I was in IT for a long time,
Yeah.
and I would. This is not a very sophisticated system that these guys had, but they refused to follow with what I would tell them. I would warn them. I'm like, listen, these emails are gonna it's getting bigger and bigger. We need an exit plan. We should either update our Outlook, our
Mhm.
Office suite, or figure out a system. And they didn't want to update anything. They just wanted to stay on what they were on. And the day
Right.
came where everything exploded, and it was it was just total catastrophe. And all I did was say, "I told you so," and I got fired after that. By the way, they let me go after that. I think it was too many "I told you so's" that I said, or it could have been the
Sure.
economy collapsing, one or the other. I can't figure out which one. Um, yeah, I think this is really so. What do you use on mobile? Do you use anything?
I
Do
use
you just
Outlook.
use Outlook on mobile?
Yeah, but Outlook on mobile is a completely different program. Remember
Interesting.
Microsoft acquired Acompli, adapted it into Microsoft Outlook. So Outlook Mobile is a completely different thing. One thing I think about sometimes is if there was some way in Windows to run Android apps like you can do on Chrome OS, the tablet version of Microsoft Outlook for Android would be vastly preferable to Windows Mail. I bet that would application would be pretty great. So, like, I'd be interested in that. But yeah, it's yeah, Google. It's tough because I wish I could just have that interface. I appreciate the fact that I've fixed a problem by switching away from inbox, but I've not found anything that I like. It's difficult.
It is difficult. And one more thing. Any opinion on Google Plus finally going away? What's your thoughts on Google Plus? What could have
No,
been?
Google Plus is Google Plus deserved to die. It's no, it's a Me Too service that never would have existed if Facebook hadn't taken off. It was Google. By the way, I talked about, Google has had a hard time leveraging Android and related things. Google Plus is a version of that, not because they were leveraging Android, but leveraging their market power to take on a newcomer at that time, Facebook, and try to duplicate everything they were doing, but just do it yourself, is an example of Google failing, where Microsoft in the 90s always succeeded.
Hmm.
And I think that points to how the world has changed, right? They didn't need regulatory action to make it happen. It was just seen as the farce that it was. I know there are people out there who love it or whatever, but
I'm going to tell you that
um,
one great thing that until recently, no other social network was able to do well, and that
yeah,
was create groups. They did
okay.
very well with with communities and groups, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Facebook kind of realized that they had a tremendous user base that were using it for groups. When we had the IIB and it was a thing,
Mhm.
we were very prominent in those groups, and it was great traffic for us. I mean, we were getting
Yeah.
thousands of people
I
coming over
don't
from there.
I don't know. I don't. Everyone's probably not like this, but when I see things that are just like a complete ripoff, I'm always vaguely disturbed. Like when Apple came out with the MacBook Air, the second gen one, the famous one, right? All of a sudden, every PC maker on earth made something like that, right?
Yeah.
One of the things I like about the Surface Pro, let's say, or the HP stuff like the X360s that they do, is that these things were thoroughly thought out to be unique and to, offer unique advantages. They weren't just complete rip-offs. Not that HP and actually eventually Microsoft both made their own MacBook Air clone, right? I mean, they both, they all kind of do it. But I don't know. There's something so shoddy about that kind of thing. And you
Yeah.
especially hate to see when those things actually succeed, right? I mean, Microsoft arguably became the company it is today because they ripped off CPM.
Yeah,
They bought
absolutely.
a CPM clone, called it MS-DOS, and away they went. Windows was designed to, steal the GUI away from the Mac or whatever. Not that it was a complete copy. It was, and I know they had their own advantages, whatever. But um, those kind of things, I don't know what it is. It just always bugs me. There's something. Google Plus always rubbed me the wrong way.
Yeah, I just got a message from somebody that I met on Google Plus that I became good friends with because of the podcasting community, and he wrote
Mhm.
the platform that brought us together is no more, and he sent me a
Well,
link to the dead
so
URL to Google. Google's no
yeah,
longer
let me
available.
tell you. So here's the old fashioned version of what you just described. In 1986, I met my wife while we were both working at Toys R Us. And there was a moment in time, and this was in Dedham, Massachusetts. And so the Toys R Us in Dedham closed, 5, 7 years ago. I don't even remember anymore. And I remember we actually went over there one last time to look at the sad shell of this store before they closed it and became like an Ocean State job lot or some terrible thing like that. But today, Toys R Us is gone, basically, right? Isn't it a good defunct? It's
They're
bankrupt
gone.
or
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
gone.
yeah.
I think it's
Bankrupt,
gone.
gone.
So that, it's always weird when a piece of your history, your personal history is wiped out. And I don't know if it's worse when it's a physical thing or or if it even makes a difference. I have no idea. But I I guess there's a part of me like, why would I care about Toys R Us? I mean, in some ways, I mean, I have memories of it, whatever. I did some cool stuff there, um, but yeah, it's weird, right? Isn't it weird? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, you feel like a little piece of your history's been chipped away.
Kind of want to, you know what? On the post show, we'll wrap it up here. Then on the post show, we'll talk
Mhm.
about this a little bit because I do want to say a lot about this. Guys, I really had a lot of fun doing this. It was a little bit different of a show. I always love just chatting with Paul, and if you want to hear us chat some more, you could go to patreon.com/whatthetuck and join us there for our post show or after show where we talk about anything and everything. Today was a little preview of how that kind of goes. Um, Sometimes you just want to, just reminisce about and talk about stuff that just comes to mind about the old days of PCs. For all things Paul, go to Thurrott.com. Paul, anything coming up on Thurrott.com? Anything big?
Anything
Is
big?
Brad doing anything?
The video for our Health of Tech um, event should be available soon. I don't know how we're going to present that. I assume it's not going to be a premium thing because I believe it's going to be over on Petri as well.
Okay.
So if you didn't get to see that in New York, that should be up soon. I think
Which I
that's the
really
big thing.
enjoyed,
And
by
then
the way. I thought it was done very
yeah,
well.
we've
Yeah,
got
very
some
good.
work trips coming up. The one of the DC trip. Well, yeah, one of the DC trips, and then the Miami trip are both all hands on deck kind of work trips. So Brad and I and all the gang will be doing what we do to each other and with each other.
Sounds bad.
So
Sounds a
I
little
know
bad.
it didn't that didn't come out more negative than I meant it. But
Follow Paul on Twitter at The Rot. You can follow me at Andrew Zarian. Of course, you can catch What the Tech everywhere podcasts are available. And of course, here on YouTube, if you're watching this on YouTube, hit that subscribe button and follow us here. And if you're watching live, stay tuned. You could enjoy What the Talk following this. If not, go to patreon.com/whatthetech and fund us there. We'll see you all next time. Take care.